Today, we're diving into Mullein tea. It's one of those ancient herbal remedies that's been around for ages, but now it's starting to get a second look from modern science. So we're going to break down what it is, what the research actually says, and what you really need to know before you even think about trying it.
You almost certainly have, right? You get that tickle in your throat, that nagging cough, and someone, maybe your grandma, says you should have a nice warm cup of herbal tea. Well, one of those old school go-to remedies is Mullein tea. So let's get into it.
So, first things first. What exactly is this stuff? What is this plant that people have been using in traditional medicine for literally centuries? Let's take a closer look.
All right, so Mullein tea is made from the leaves of a plant with the fancy name Verbascum thapsus. It's a pretty common flowering plant that you can find all over Europe, Africa, and Asia, and for generations it's been a staple in folk medicine cabinets.
So what did people actually use it for? Well, it was mainly all about respiratory issues. For centuries, people have reached for it to try and soothe everything from a chronic cough and a common cold to even the symptoms of asthma.
Okay, so that's the history, the folklore. But what happens when we take this ancient remedy and put it under the microscope of modern science? Let's see what the early, and I mean early, research suggests.
And before we go a single step further, I have to put a huge pin in this. This is so important. Almost all of the scientific evidence we have right now comes from lab studies. We're talking about test tubes and petri dishes, not people. And that's a critical distinction to keep in your mind as we go through this.
What's really interesting is that some of the modern findings seem to line up with that traditional use. Researchers think mullein might have anti-inflammatory properties, which could, in theory, explain why it was used for things like asthma. There was even a 2012 study that found it had antispasmodic effects. But, and this is a big but, that study was done on worms. Yeah, you heard me right, worms, not humans.
The lab research also hints at some pretty interesting antiviral properties. A test tube study back in 2007 found that mullein extract was actually effective against the flu virus. And then another lab study in 2012 showed it had some activity against a virus from the herpes family. Again, these results sound promising, but remember our big rule. This is all in a lab, not in a person.
Now, when we start talking about bacteria, well, that's where the story gets a little messy. You see, one lab study from 2015 found that mullein extract could stop the growth of E. coli. But then, more recent research came out and found it had no effect whatsoever. This is a perfect example of how science works. It's not always a straight line, and it shows why we need so much more research before we can say anything for sure.
These conflicting results are exactly why we need to take a moment and talk about the limitations here. It's so easy to get carried away with potential benefits, but we've got to stay grounded in the facts as they are right now.
And really, this quote kind of sums it all up perfectly. The potential is there. The lab studies are definitely suggestive, but the actual research on human beings is, for now, incredibly limited.
And here's the bottom line from a regulatory standpoint. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, has not approved mullein to treat, cure, or prevent any medical condition at all. It's sold as an herbal supplement, which is a totally different category from a medicine.
Okay, so with any supplement, it's just as important, maybe even more important, to understand the potential risks as it is the potential benefits. So let's talk about what you absolutely need to know before this stuff gets anywhere near your shopping cart.
So, the mullein plant itself is kind of fuzzy. It's covered in these tiny, superfine hairs. For some people, just handling the plant can cause skin irritation. But here's the really big one. Those exact same hairs can seriously irritate your throat if you don't strain the tea properly.
And this is especially important to hear. If you are pregnant, breastfeeding, or if you have any kind of chronic health condition, you need to be extremely cautious. Why? Because there's zero research on the safety of mullein tea for these groups. We just don't know, and the unknown risks are simply not worth it.
So, should you talk to a doctor before trying it? The answer is a resounding 100% absolutely yes. Given the total lack of human studies and all the potential unknowns, talking to your doctor or another qualified healthcare provider before you try mullein tea, or any new herbal supplement for that matter, is always the smartest, safest move you can make.
All right, so let's say you've done your homework, you've had that important chat with your doctor, and you've decided to go ahead. How do you actually make it safely? Let's walk through the steps together.
The process itself is really quite simple. You just add about 1 to 2 tablespoons of the dried leaves to a cup of boiling water. Then you let it steep for a good while, somewhere between 15 and 30 minutes. But believe it or not, the most important step is still to come.
And here it is. If you only remember one thing from this whole process, let it be this. Do not skip straining. You have to strain it thoroughly, and I mean thoroughly, using a very fine mesh strainer or even better, a cheesecloth. This is how you get rid of all those tiny, irritating plant hairs we talked about. This step is non-negotiable.
So, after all that, where does that leave us? Mullein tea is such a fascinating case study, isn't it? On one hand, you have centuries of tradition and folklore, and on the other, you have this promising, but very, very preliminary, lab science. The real challenge for all of us is to respect that history, while still being critical and patient as we wait for the hard evidence to catch up. So the real question is, how do we strike that balance?